Thank you for being optimistic. Without further ado, fellow Toastmasters, distinguished guests, I give you our guest speaker of the half hour, Aaron Beverly. Let's give him a wave of support. Aaron, you're on. Take the
Hello,
stage.
everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. I apologize for my tardiness, but sometimes the train schedules and the trains themselves have other plans. But since I'm on, we're just going to go ahead and get started. The topic for today is stories are everywhere. People come up to me sometimes and they ask me, Aaron, how do you create your stories? How can you find the right story? How can you find that great story that you can use for a speech contest, a world championship? And I always think to myself, the stories that you are looking for are everywhere around us. If we simply change our perspective and start dispelling some of the myths that we have around storytelling, you will find that not only can you find stories everywhere, but you can also overcome the greatest myth of all, the myth that I am not a good storyteller. Everyone in the world, I believe, has a quality story within them. Again, it's just a matter of perspective. Let's take the speech that I gave at the 2019 World Championship of Public Speaking. That was about an Indian wedding that I attended in 2018. People who are Indian come up to me and they say, Aaron, I cannot believe that you were able to take such a common event and make that into a championship story. And this leads me to the first myth that I want to debunk. This myth is that stories need to be absolutely grand in order for you to think that they're worthy of being shared. If you take your common events day to day and you change the perspective, all of a sudden you have a much stronger, more in-depth and quality story. Now, when I created my speech, what made it different, what changed the perspective, was me experiencing that wedding as a Black man, as a person outside of India who had never experienced that before. And I'm showing you through my speech, my experience in that wedding. So that was the perspective. I'm not necessarily talking just about the Indian wedding. I'm talking about my experience in the Indian wedding and my confusion and I'm trying to find the right word. So yeah, my confusion, my drama, and that is the perspective that I'm taking you through. So what I want you to do, if you have a pen and paper nearby, I want you to do certain activities as I go along in this presentation. And the first thing that I want you to write, don't think too hard about it. Write the first thing that comes to mind, a life event that happened to you in any time, it doesn't matter. I want you to write down 3 of these. Right now, I'll give you 20 seconds, starting now. 3 things, anything that you can think of. Don't need to write entire sentences. It can just be a single word. Okay. Now, when you experience these different things, I want you to write about emotions that are tied to these. So for the 3 stories or the 3 potential stories that you just listed, write 3 emotions that you had within that story. So by the end, I'm sorry, and I'll give you another 20 seconds. So you should have 9 in all, 9 emotions. Okay. Now, when we are trying to change our perspective, the emotions are what are emotions are the key. These are the keys to our perspectives. So going into my 2019 speech again, that story about the Indian wedding, I was confused, I was scared, I was resistant. So all of these and more are the different perspectives that I was taking you through. So whenever you are going through your stories, take us through your perspective, change the perspectives. So you could have an experience of going to the grocery store, but what about going to the grocery store made you feel those different emotions? So this is how you start to develop a story and start to establish your perspective in a common event. Now, moving on to the next activity, I want you to start thinking about the different characters that are in your story. Now, in my story, I was one of the characters. Then we had the ominous smiler. We had Sunit. Again, 20 seconds. And there's a reason why I'm telling you 20 seconds. 20 seconds, write out as many characters for those 3 stories. And actually, you know what? I'm going to give you 30 seconds this time. 30 seconds, as many characters as you can think of for each of those 3 potential stories. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Now we have our characters. Now, in your list of your characters, I want you to write out another 30 seconds the emotions that they would have had. So another 30 seconds, write out the emotions that those characters would have. All right. Now, characters are very important to the story, and you want your characters to be developed as well. The reason why I had you put in the emotions of your characters is how you also flesh out your characters. They also need to feel in your stories. They also need to have emotions in your stories, because a lot of times they are going to be on the journey with you as the protagonist, or they're going to be the antagonist. Going back to the 2019 speech, the antagonist was the ominous smiler. And the emotions that the ominous smiler had, she was weak, then she was threatening, Then she was aggressive. So these emotions played out throughout the speech, and it gave it what I call emotional variety. So you want your characters to have emotional variety. If you just have a stagnant character throughout your entire presentation, they have no movement and emotion, they're going to be a very boring character, and they can be a very flat character. You want to make sure that your characters in the story have emotions as well. So we have established our story in terms of putting a basic scene. We have now the characters of the story, and we have the emotions for ourselves and our other characters. So what do we do with this? In my speech, and all of my speeches actually, what I do is I start testing it out. So I'm going to ask for a couple of volunteers. Well, actually, so we may not have enough time for a couple of volunteers. I'm going to ask a volunteer to give us their story as they have it right now, and make sure that you tell us about that setting, the scene, and then tell us about the character, tell us about your perspective, make sure that you go through emotions, and then make sure that make sure that they go through emotions as well. So that is your criteria. And when you are doing this, do not aim for perfection. Aim for just getting it out there, because that is the key. Sometimes we overthink about our stories. We don't need to overthink. Just let it come out naturally as you talking to a group of friends at the bar. Or if you don't go to the bar, at the park or at the water cooler, wherever you may have a conversation with your friends. Now I see, okay, Sunny says to ask Aaron. I'm assuming that you don't mean me.
LOL. So Aaron, am I going to speak a story, or should I talk about the points that you're referring to?
Talk about your story with the points that I just brought up. Try to incorporate as much as possible.
Okay. Scene was back in the old days when I was studying secondary school. I was locked in a dark rubbish bin. I was trapped, locked, and you can hear the laughter of wicked smells of bullies looking down at you. They are happy, they are devilish, and they are definitely thrilling over the from overbullying. But I was lost, afraid, and really wanted to get home. That time, I was simply wondering when will be my next exit. How can I run away from them? But life is always like that. Suddenly, there is a McDonald's staff that walked past and drive away those bullies and freed me from the cave. With a nice hamburger in his hand, he passed to me and said, "Look, you must be hungry." That warm smell, that sunny face, and most importantly, his vocal variety, his tone, just lightened me up that there's always hope in life. Maybe, yeah, I'll wrap it up like that. Is it okay?
Yeah. Yep. So, in his story, this is the last activity that I want you to do, and then I'm going to actually give you some homework. And again, I do apologize. This is an abridged version of what I originally had planned. But in his story, there were 3 different types of characters that you to mark down. So on your notes, you have a protagonist, you have an antagonist, and you have a hero. So this is one of the most common storytelling models, where you have a protagonist who is the star of your story. 9 times out of 10, if we're given a personal story, it's going to be us as a character. In my speech, it was me. Then you have the antagonist. So this is the conflict. I will say that the antagonist doesn't always have to be a person. It can be a concept. It can be something that isn't tangible. But the antagonist is another character. Then you have the hero. So this is the person who comes in and saves us or gives us the vital information that we need to overcome the antagonist, or they come in and defeat the antagonist themselves. Now, in Aaron's story that he just presented, he had himself as the character, the antagonist. The protagonist, had the bullies as the antagonist. And I started losing you a little bit, but you did have a hero that came and drove the bullies away. So this is the basic structure that you can use for your stories. Now, what I'm going to give you for homework is something that I learned from a book called Story Worthy. This is a book by Matthew Dix. This is a very good book about storytelling. It was instrumental in me building my World Championship speech. And in that book, he has something called Homework for Life. And Homework for Life is basically every single day, you keep a journal or a diary or wherever you can use your computer, wherever you can consistently write something down every day. And one moment, one story-worthy moment in your day, just write it down. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it does need to be quick. It needs to be fast. So remember when I told you to keep doing things in 20 seconds? That should be similar to how you do Homework for Life. Don't try to make the story have a complete beginning, middle, and end. Just write it down. First thing that comes to your mind. This is the technique that I use to create my stories and build out what I call my story file. And this is something that you can do as well. Now, as you write down your Homework for Life, you can then refer back to it at a later point, and then you can start fleshing it out by doing what? By adding your scenes, by adding your characters, and by adding your emotions of the characters. When you do that, then you are ready to start testing it. I test my stories extremely fast. My World Championship speech started out as a Facebook post. Again, you don't have to make it perfect. It just needs to be out there. And you keep doing this, then you can keep getting better at telling your stories, and you will overcome the myth that you are not a good storyteller. And you will also find that stories truly are everywhere. I know it over time, but thank you everyone for having me. I'm not sure, do we have time for any Q&A?
Yes, Aaron, we have until 8:15, and then as Aaron, our other Aaron likes to say, sometimes we have the after party, but we do have at least 10 minutes for some Q&A. So I am now going to ask, first of all, will we just give a wave to Aaron, everyone? And now I will call our question master, President Tricia Grow, and you can take it from here, Tricia, and give us our instructions.
Thank you. I will go ahead and invite everyone to go ahead and ask questions in the chat. I certainly only have received one so far. I think we were also engrossed in your knowledge and presentation, Aaron, that we were all doing your homework, that everyone forgot about asking questions. So the one question that I did receive, this was from a guest, Jason Lau. He wanted to know, how do you improve an ending, a conclusion of your speech to make everyone feel better? I'd like, because yours was so, we could connect with you, with you, whether we were your color or not. Ever been to an Indian wedding? Like, how do you come up with an ending like that? Is I think is what he's trying to ask.
So there are many ways to answer that question. I will speak to the story ending. So with your story ending, one thing that you really want to make sure, you want to make sure that you have tied all loose ends. If you have any open questions by the end of the story, your audience is going to be thinking about those lingering questions instead of focusing on what it is that you have to say last. So make sure that you tie up all of the loose ends. In my speech, when I first started practicing it, I never told you how or what Brandon had to pay for the shoes. And my feedback that I was constantly getting was, well, how much did Brandon have to pay for the shoes? How much did Brandon have to pay for the shoes? So I had to make sure in my story that I closed that loop. And I had to say that Brandon paid 10 times what the shoes were worth. I just added that one line and that closed it. So make sure that you close all of those loops. Make sure that you answer all of those lingering questions. Because again, if you have a lingering question, the audience is going to be thinking about that instead of your story. And then the other thing that I want to say about a story ending, we want to make sure that we have an understanding of the differences between a story and a speech. To me, the biggest difference between a story and a speech is that a speech, 9 times out of 10, has to be explicit. You have to explicitly make it clear what your point was. Your stories, however, don't have to have an explicit message. The message can be implicit. So it can just be a moral of the story that you just understand. For instance, we look at classic stories like the Three Little Pigs, and there's no explicit message that you must work hard every single day and you must make sure that you build your houses full of bricks and blah, blah, blah. No, there's nothing that exists like that. That's why I had such a hard time trying to figure something out just to say. But the implicit message is that you just work hard and you don't have your life be all about play. So it's not explicitly said in a Three Little Pigs book, but it is implied. Now, when it comes to the World Championship of Public Speaking, and forgive me, I'm rambling on with this answer here, but when it comes to the World Championship of Public Speaking, there have only been about 3 people who have won with a speech that was just a pure story where the message was implicit. And those people that I know of are Ed Tate, one of those days. He had no explicit message to the audience. Then Randy Harvey, Lessons from Fat Dad, which was a little bit different because he gave lessons and morals in his speech, but it wasn't toward the audience. And then Ryan Avery, the 2012 world champion of public speaking. So those are the only times where a story was told and it was a implicit message. But that also goes to show you that it can be done. But just make sure that you know the difference. All right, any other questions?
I don't see
Trisha, if there are no other questions, I had one more question. Trisha, is there another question before I say mine?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Why did I lose it?
Aaron.
Just want to go ask you about this intro that you did, taking a risk with the title.
Aaron Beverly. Leave a lasting memory using as few words as possible and strive with every fiber of your being to avoid being the type of person who rambles on and on with no end in sight, more likely than not causing more listeners to sit and think to themselves, oh my goodness, can somebody please make this stop? Leave a lasting memory using as few words as possible and strive with every fiber of your being to avoid being the type of person who rambles on and on with no end in sight, more likely than not causing more listeners to sit and think to themselves, oh my goodness, can somebody please make this stop? Aaron Beverly.
Be honest. You enjoyed that, didn't you? Now please do me a favor. Recite that entire title off the top of your head right now. Go. Not all at once. Wait a minute. Do you mean to tell me that you cannot remember all 57 of the words in that title? Neither can I. But do you?
Okay, I just wanted to play that because you got a lot of attention and you came in second place in 2016. Just explain a little bit about that to our audience.
Yep. With the speech title that I gave, I wanted to make sure that I was seen as being different. And even this year, I wanted to be seen as different. One of the things that I hear over the years is that there is a sameness about the World Championship of Public Speaking. And whether you believe that this is true or not, I wanted to make sure that I made a mark. And sometimes that means taking a risk. It means doing something that isn't normally done, that people would be afraid to do. I heard people wanting to do the long title in a international speech contest for ages before I actually did it. There was one person who I actually was inspired to do it from. He actually did it in a humorous speech contest, and he won his humorous speech contest. But nobody else would do it in the international speech contest scene. So I said, why not me? I'll try it, see what happens, and the rest is history. But you have to take a risk sometimes to make sure that you stand out and look different from everybody else. One of the biggest things that I did that made me seem different from everybody else was just coming out in the traditional Indian attire, while I was in a suit and a tie, or at least all the other men were. So sometimes you have to be different.
Thank you. And back to you, Trish.
I have one additional question asked by Sandra, a returning guest. She says, you had mentioned Tate, Randy, and Ryan. However, you did not mention yourself. How do you see your speech that won? Do you feel that it was explicit or implicit?
Yep. So my story was definitely explicit because I had the message given explicitly at the end that sometimes we live in a world that seems divisive, but there are people who still believe in it. Do you? So I start talking to the audience directly. Now, I did practice before using an implicit message, but my message wasn't getting across to my audience. They didn't know what the message was about. They didn't know what the speech was about. I'm sorry. Since they didn't know what the speech was about, I had to say to myself, I have to make this perfectly clear. I have to make this explicit. So I couldn't leave any doubt. And we have hit the 10-minute mark.
All right. Well, on behalf of competitive communicators, Aaron, and your co-district mate, I would like to thank you very, very much for coming to the meeting. We all know that life happens and you had no control over your train. So we openly welcome you back whenever your schedule would allow. Just let myself, Aaron, or Sunny know what would work for you. You're always welcome to come back as a guest as well. But we do so much appreciate your time. Please, everyone, again, please show Aaron our appreciation. And I'll turn the meeting back to our back to our Toastmaster of the day to finish up.
And my finishing up is just, again, thank you, Aaron Beverly, for sharing your information. I'm definitely going to watch the replay so that I can get even some better tips about a story that I actually have in my head. And knowing that there are characters and antagonists and protagonists and that there's some emotional variety, I'm going to see what I can come up with, and I'll have to get back to you on that. So thanks for sharing your tips. We all want to be better storytellers. When I interviewed you a few months ago, I said something by someone who quoted Miss Duarte, that she said that stories are the emotional glue that connect your message to the audience. And definitely your story, your message was a connection to many people, because at the end of the day, there are more things that keep us together than apart. So when we start understanding that, we can also write better stories and find better quality stories. So we want you to help us come back again next season, if you can.